It's named after this song that you might know from the Pogues. And it was a huge hit in the 1980s, Dirty Old Town. And it kind of speaks of the romance, but also the melancholy of an old industrial town. Now, an old industrial town is actually, if we're honest, is what Rotterdam is. But on the other hand, a dirty old town is hardly ever what a city admits to the outside world what it is. This is kind of how Rotterdam promotes itself as this shiny new city of brand new buildings that is super, as you say, that has shaken all the traces of history off itself and is a brand new collection of immediately recognizable objects. And this is also and Rotterdam is also a city that is not dirty at all. So first, it's not old at all. We want it to promote it. It's also not dirty at all, even if it has the biggest harbor in Europe. So it's a city of where children, etc., even take part in all the huge efforts that we make towards resilience and sustainability. For example, the Rotterdam Climate Initiative, that is one of those huge, it's actually a sort of umbrella under which all kinds of projects are put that might have something to do with sustainability, and also it sets some goals like so much carbon output in that year, etc. And one of the things that could fall under it is this, for example. It's maybe we will see it in the coming months. It's a floating farm for cows. Because the people who made it say there's an enormous need to bring agriculture inside the city so that the supply chains are much shorter. And on the other hand, they say there's an enormous need for new typologies and new structures that you can build on water. But in fact, it's a heavily subsidized. It's a kind of symbolic. It's a symbolic gesture. So you can drive through the harbor, and then suddenly you smell cow dung, and that is actually kind of a weird experience. But this is the kind of way that Rotterdam tries to promote itself these days.
Is that nearby?
On the west side, yes, yeah. Exactly, it's exactly on the border with Schiedam. So you could say that Rotterdam is trying to make itself into a sort of place where there are no conflicts anymore, that it can still be an economically very powerful place and still be completely clean, that it can be a place where you can have cars driving through it, electric of course, but also have cattle in it. It is a place where all where you don't need to make big choices about should we continue with the harbor or not, because we want to we want to lessen our carbon output. No, you don't need to make those choices because everything is being solved with technology. And this is an image, kind of you could say, utopian image made by an urbanist office called Posad Maxwan, and it's kind of a vision of the future of Rotterdam. And what you see is the way that they made it is it's a kind of a fusion of 17th century painting with a collage technique from now. So the cows and some of for example, the part in the foreground, the clouds, they are all from the Dutch 17th century landscape tradition, and the pieces in between are just collaged together as if it's an architecture collage from now. And what this image shows is, or what it reminds you strongly of, is that also here you see that all conflict has been wiped away. The cars don't even have their own pathways or routes anymore because they are so safe and they have such good working, good sensors that they will avoid people. The cows can just be petted and by the children walking around, etc. So it is a conflict-free city where all of the normal safety or pollution concerns that we have now are gone. And in that sense, it reminds you a lot of the Garden of Eden. It is actually inspired by the Garden of Eden. You probably you might remember the first parts of the Bible where Adam and Eve live in the Garden of Eden, and in the Garden of Eden, the lamb and the lion lie together. You know, also the Garden of Eden is a place where you have no conflict. There is no struggle, no competition, no contested space, until, of course, the idiot eats the apple, and we were banished from it. Now, to bring this back to Rotterdam, this is actually also a painting from the 17th, it's a map from the 17th century. Rotterdam and the harbor, so the main source of both its wealth and its dirtiness, it's a very very long relationship. Here you can see Rotterdam in the 17th century, and you can see that the part on the south with all the canals running through it, that was added in the late 17th century, and it's called the Water City. So also, already here the structure of Rotterdam was being adapted to the world trade. One of the problems, however, was that when the boats got bigger, it became a problem that none could pass directly to Rotterdam. They had to take a kind of circuitous route to the city, and they were very slow, and sometimes they got stuck in the mud. So Rotterdam, in the 19th century, made this enormously revolutionary action. Actually, they broke through the Maas River. They broke it through directly to the sea. So they broke through this dune landscape on the left in the Hoek van Holland. So in that way, the boats could pass by the silt and the sand and go straight into the Maas River, and Rotterdam would have a direct connection to the sea, and therefore to the world trade, and therefore it could still compete with Amsterdam. Here you can see this action. So it was, of course, for then, but even if you think about it now, a kind of a megalomaniacal action just to reroute a river in order to give your city a better connection to trade. Here you see the rerouting actually happening, these boats dredging up the sand from the bottom of the new river. And the result of it was that Rotterdam saw its traffic of boats, it saw it exploding in numbers. And so what the city did was build the most modern harbor facilities that you had at that time. They were all driven by electricity, so there were electricity stations in the area. Their buildings were hyper modern with all kinds of ways to facilitate the transporting of goods from the boat to the train. So in fact you should see it as a kind of a series of parallels. You would have the water, next to it the quay, then you would have a trained track with cranes running over it, then you would have a warehouse building, and then you would have another road, and then it would start over again, and then in the other sense. In this way, these piers were built, and the Rotterdam harbor this is Rotterdam around 1900, was the most, in terms of its technology and its machinery, it was the most modern one in Europe. But of course, what happens when you have a harbor that grows exponentially, then you also need an exponential increase in people who live in Rotterdam and who work for the harbor. And you can see that here. So you can see that in the top left you can see the harbor area, and on the bottom of it you can see this endless field of housing projects. I think this picture was taken around 1920. Because Rotterdam, every year 10,000 more people came to live in the city. So it was growing enormously. But also the technology at the same time was also growing enormously. And one of the most interesting things, you can see it for real, by the way, at the Maritime Museum, it's just outdoors, is this, it's a kind of a steam-powered grain elevator. That's what it's called. It's the alien-like thing on the bottom right. What it could do is it could suck up grain from one ship and blow it out into another ship. In that way, and because one of the most important transmissions in the harbor was from ocean ships to river ships, riverboats. So they made a new kind of harbor, and those are the two that you can see on the top left side, that have relatively less importance or that give relatively less importance to the quays, but that were just like huge water, you could say, plains on which a riverboat could come next to an ocean liner, and then these things that float would come in between, and they would take the grain and put it in the ocean liner, with grain coming from, for example, America. America was one of the big grain exporters, or Ukraine, of course, and then put it in the riverboat and then take it away to Germany, because Germany was one of the most important countries for the harbor of Rotterdam. Now, what Rotterdam has always had, and you can see it here, but you can also see it here, is that it nearly has a tradition of mutilating itself with technology. This is the historical medieval center of Rotterdam, and they decided to put a train line in the late 19th century straight through the middle of the city, so that the train line would pass the old church literally by meters. Some people here are old enough to remember that you would sit in the train and it would each time give a kind of a worrying effect, because you thought you were going to crash into the buildings around it. But it also shows that Rotterdam always had this. Rotterdam does not have this tradition that Amsterdam, for example, has, of the interest in city beauty of the city or historical value. It is starting a little bit now, maybe, but at that time it was capable and willing to sacrifice everything for progress, for growth, for industry. Even if it created also these kinds of land. And you can also see that when you lived in Rotterdam, there was always a very good chance that you lived very, very close to the harbor and all its pollution, all its noise, all its danger. Because the harbor grew, and then parts of the city were always added onto it, and they grew with it. So the harbor, since you could say since 1880, has been the main force and the main driver of growth of the city as a living place in Rotterdam. I think more or less until the 1960s. Rotterdam was always this interest of Rotterdam in progress and growth. You can also see here, because this is before the war. This is in this photo was probably taken in the late 1930s, the one on the right, and the one on the left maybe also. Before the Second World War and the legendary bombing, Rotterdam had already destroyed enormous parts of its historical city. You can see that the building on the right, that is the Bijenkorf department store, for that Bijenkorf department store, you can imagine that the little houses next to it, they were originally also on that location. So they were all demolished in order to build one building. And the same goes for a whole series of buildings on the Koolsingel, like the old Passage, like the trade center, the Beurs trade center. Yeah.
That's still there.
And then there was the post office and the city hall, and these are gigantic buildings with gigantic footsteps for which hundreds, maybe thousands of houses were demolished to give place to them. Now, so when the bombing happened on the 4th of May of 1940, people came, this is where the new institute is now, and the Boijmans Museum more or less. There was a kind of a park, and people fled to that park from the bombed out center of the city, but also from the not bombed out parts. People came to the park to watch this spectacle of the burning city. But this burning city, there was the reaction to it was. Of course, in the very first reaction was, of course, shock and horror. This is, by the way, how it looked immediately afterwards, the center of Rotterdam. But the interesting thing is, of course, there was an enormous damage, but not everything was, absolutely not everything was demolished. Still, after clearing the roads of rubble, the planners went further, and they also started to even of buildings that were still half standing or three-quarters standing, they started to demolish them. Buildings so that the underground would be completely empty. And then in parallel to that, what a political move was, this is what it looked like, was to also declare it administratively empty, meaning that all the ownership of that people, private people had, or companies had over their piece of land in the harbor, they were all signed away. So people were they did not have their plot of land anymore. Instead, they got a kind of a voucher that would give them new land if the reconstruction was underway. And this was called the pennenstreek-onteigening. That means the, how do you call it, what is die onteigening ook weer? Well, you know, when you take something from someone and it was done with one sign of the pen. So with one sign, sorry? Eminent domain, yes. So eminent domain was placed on the whole city with one sign. So then the city was not only physically completely an empty canvas, but it was also administratively an empty canvas. And then and this was done because there was an undercurrent of very modern thinking urban planners and architects in the city who said when we rebuild the city, we should not waste this crisis. You know, we should really use the fact that we have a completely empty city now. They saw it as a huge opportunity because then they could finally realize that modern city, according to modern principles, that they had been dreaming of. This is one of the planners of the city. And so this city that they were going to build, it consisted of ideas of extremely modern new buildings that were completely focused on trade, traffic, on industry, etc. This, for example, is the wholesale building. It's very near here. And then in front of it, you can see the traffic system in the new city, which is also that the traffic goes under and over in the middle of the city, which was very revolutionary then. So what you see, and this is, by the way, this is at like 20 meters from here. What you see in Rotterdam is that Rotterdam, this empty canvas, was being filled up with typologies and experiments that had not happened before. One of them is these, the Lijnbaan shopping center. That's just, if you go here left, it starts. And this was actually like a city block. A city block consists of shops on the ground floor, and then above the shops, houses, and in the courtyard you could have a garden. That's how a classic city block works. What the architects of this Lijnbaan street did was to separate all those things, to put the shops here, to put the houses perpendicular to it, and to put the park on the edge of it. And in that way, each of those elements would have its own footprint. And also, the shops, you could put the shops parallel to each other, and then in between, you would have a pedestrian area. You wouldn't have cars that came there, you would have a pedestrian area. So it became the first pedestrian shopping street in the world, the Lijnbaan. And this is, and it also gave for very strange effects. You would say that this is somewhere far in the suburbs, but this is actually really in the heart of the city. This is the housing that they put separately from the shops with a little park in between. And it looks like it looks like a Swedish new town or something. Here you can see the pedestrian shopping street. Its entrance, until not so long ago in Rotterdam, because Rotterdam still believes very deeply in progress, they thought, well, it's not in such good shape, let's just demolish the whole thing. And then just in time, that I think helped by the economic crisis, they decided not to do it, and now actually it's being restored. So they put these original letters from the 50s back on, for example. One of the other things that is typical about Rotterdam's reconstruction is that it was always seen and presented as a spectacle. So on top of this wholesale building, there was a cinema. And before and after the show, the screen would go up so that so people could look from their seats after watching a cowboy movie or something. They could see the progress of the reconstruction. And Michelle is going to point out.
No, you can't walk. So this is where we are. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, there were a bit less buildings, so everything looks smaller in a way, because you could.
Also this persistent rumor of this being a photo collage.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. That it would be a montage of this picture.
Oh really? People don't believe it.
Because it's too sharp. But it would have been the view that you would have.
So it is, but what do you think?
Maybe it's a wrong Photoshop. We did a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, that's true. That's a long time ago, so we forgot. Yeah. But so here you can see that the real spectacle of the city in the 1950s and early 60s was the reconstruction. Another famous building, actually by the same architect, Maaskant, was this, the Euromast. And the Euromast also was a viewing platform. And here it is aimed. The central city is here to the left, and the harbor development is on the right, because the harbor moved very fast to the right, to the west. And here you can see the view being aimed to the right. So here again, Rotterdam is creating its own viewer platforms to follow its own growth. And this is something that this city has been doing. Yeah, it shows how obsessed Rotterdam is with its own modernity and its own constant growth and progress. Now, this is one of the things that was happening in the West, the Europoort. So it's a whole series of new harbor areas that were being built for petrochemical industries, for containers, of course, something that was then beginning. And that also meant that, wait, I'll show you this first. Here you can see that this is the Europoort. You can see that these harbor areas are enormous and are are industrial. So they're not just traffic of goods, but they're industrial. And what you also can see is that they're so huge that the city cannot just follow them with putting houses next to them. They needed to, because the harbor was growing so fast that it moved away from the city. So the city had to build satellite towns next to them. And this is what Michelle will talk about later. This is Hoogvliet here. And Hoogvliet was also a satellite town that did have the same phenomenon as you saw in central Rotterdam, which is the permanent closeness between habitation and industry. So these very modern houses in Hoogvliet, they were built for the workers in the Shell, in the petrochemical industries. So and they were built very close, so they could bike to their work every day, and the children and the wives would stay in the flats. And so entire new communities were built in order to facilitate the harbor with workers. Now, one of the biggest revolutions in the Rotterdam, you could say the Rotterdam labor history, was the invention in Texas of the Sealand, by the company called Sealand, of the freight container. The inventor of it was a guy with a trucking company in Texas, and he saw an enormous waste of time and effort in shipping, for example, I don't know, let's say grapefruits or pineapples from a truck or from a farm into a truck. Then the truck would go to a boat, and then all these pineapples would have to be taken out of the boat. Then the boat would arrive in Rotterdam, and then all the pineapples would have to be put in several trucks again. And then finally, so he thought, why don't I just put whatever it is, refrigerators, bicycles, pineapples, you put them in one box. That box fits on, everything needs to be standardized, and it fits on a truck, it fits on a boat, it fits on a train. And it can be put somewhere so you can easily open it up and get stuff out. Now this was like a gimmick-like idea, but it took the world by storm. He invented it in the early 60s. This is Rotterdam in 1966 with the first container boat arriving. And before you knew it, the harbor of Rotterdam started to look, or a boat, this is very recent, this is a boat with 20,000 containers. It's about the size of the one that got stuck in the Suez Canal. And before you knew it, it had a devastating effect on the labor market in harbors all over the world, and especially Rotterdam, because the work of putting things in and taking things out of boats and ships and trains and trucks was, of course, one of the biggest employers or sources of employment in the city. And doing it this way, you only needed one crane driver who could pick up the containers and put them down somewhere. So it meant A, much less employment for people, B, an enormous hunger or enormous need for very, very, very large surfaces of concrete or asphalt in the harbor as close to the sea as possible, because these boats were getting bigger and bigger and bigger. They're all, everything is always related to the Panama Canal, so it's the Panamax. That means the maximum size of a boat that can go through the Panama Canal. That's always so every time the Panama Canal gets a little bit broader, all the ships start getting broader and longer too. So this is what happened. They made the Maasvlakte, which is a whole area of harbor surface built into the North Sea, built into this is now we're outside of the Dutch territory. Well, we're in our national waters. but still we left the land, and now we're building enormous surfaces in the sea. And this is how the surfaces are filled. Here you can see a terminal for containers. And you have to imagine that this terminal for containers that could turn over tens of thousands of containers every day, it would be run by, let's say, 15 or 20 people. That's all it would take, because a lot of the actions are also robotized. So it's a very impressive but also very alienating idea. Oh, why do we have these lovely children again? No, I'm not going to talk about that. Of course, one of the things that Rotterdam also has, kind of in its endless hunger for progress, Rotterdam is also kind of sometimes doing things that are very backward. At a very late date, still building coal plants, for example, or still Rotterdam is the biggest coal turnover place in Europe. And here you see the coal coming also from America a lot. I'm not sure if Ukraine also exports coal, but so Rotterdam, the Rotterdam harbor is really a harbor that defines progress in terms of, that has always defined progress in terms of quantitative progress. They wanted the most containers, the fastest sea links, the most coal, etc. So you can see that here too. So here you can see it says here, well, basically it says that Rotterdam is, I can't see I can't read oh yeah, that's 47% of all coal that is being turned over in Rotterdam, in European harbors, is in Rotterdam. So Rotterdam is really by far the biggest. Why is everything repeating itself? One of the things that is also an interesting by-effect of this history, of this quantitative, this history of constant chasing after quantitative progress, is of course that with this constant hunger for immigrants, because they were coming from anywhere. Immigrants, of course, until 70, 80 years ago, if you would say an immigrant, you would mean somebody from Brabant or Limburg, which are provinces of the Netherlands, a couple of hours driving from here. But there were also immigrants, an important part of immigrants from the Mediterranean area. Spaniards were here, Portuguese people. There's a very large, there has been for a very long time a huge part of Portuguese people, and of course Chinese people. And that is really, oh, dankjewel. That is really, that has also, well, like in many cities, has created a very strong and deeply rooted Chinese community. Those you can see on the right, and on the left. On the right you can see Angelo Betti, the real Angelo Betti, because Angelo Betti's right now is one of Rotterdam's most popular Chinese Italian restaurants. And here you can see that the young first generation immigrant Angelo Betti came here to push an ice cream stand, and now his name is attached to one of Rotterdam's institutions. I'm sure while you're here we might order pizza from Angelo Betti. That we nearly always do. This history of migration also has its a whole history in itself, and it also has its own kind of dark episodes. What you can see on the top left is a bunch of really happy-looking Turkish guys who have just gotten off the bus from Ankara or Istanbul and are ready to work in Rotterdam. And because then there was in Holland an active policy to get young men from these countries to work in the harbor, etc., because there was a labor shortage. And sometimes they started their own businesses. It could be shoe shining, or ice cream store. But in the early 70s, you could also see the first effects of how the first wave of immigrants, the people from Limburg and Brabant and etc., so the Dutch immigrants, started to rebel against the influx of the Turkish immigrants. And this had often to do with the fact that the Turkish immigrants were not there with their families. They were alone, so they lived in hostels. And then these hostels gave a lot of, it's like students in the hostel. They gave a lot of people felt that they gave a lot of nuisance, a lot of noise, a lot of bad behavior. So, and they were always put in the poorest areas. So in 1972 you had the famous Afrikaanderbuurt riots, about which I'm not sure, will we be going to the Afrikaanderbuurt?
Yeah, the whole workshop of diversity.
Oh, of course. Okay. Okay. Well, let's make a point of visiting that street, even if there's no buildings of it left, probably. But still, to pay our respects to the. It's a street. It's on the east side of the Afrikaanderbuurt. No. Yeah.
I think they tore those buildings down, but the street is still there.
Yeah.
Were the immigrants, I mean, were they placed, or did they have to find, were there programs, or were they placed?
No, they weren't. No, they weren't really placed, but there was a whole infrastructure, often of older immigrants. So for example, Turkish entrepreneurs who would then buy a piece of real estate and then rent out beds, not even rooms, beds to. It's a little bit like what is happening now with the Polish or Moldavian or Bulgarian. It's the same thing, and also now you can see that people who live next door to them protest. They might not throw bricks through the windows and try to burn all their furniture like they did in 1972. But it is true. It's a kind of case of history repeating itself. Oops. Yesterday, I think I mentioned that I was writing a book on Karel Weber. And here you can see his most famous building, the Paperclip. It's a gigantic, hundreds of meters long housing project, and it's folded around, so it looks like a folded open paperclip. And it is interesting because it is a building that was built just after people realized that the harbor area was over with in Kop van Zuid, in the oldest part of the harbor, and this was one of the first projects that came that put housing in the place of what used to be an industrial area. You can still see that to the south of it and to the north of it you can see harbor buildings, and then you can see this weird alien building dropped in the middle of it, and introducing social housing in the middle of this decrepit or abandoned harbor area. This was the start, this building, for a whole wave of and this is the so-called Kop van Zuid project, and this is a project that started in the 80s and is now, well, let's say it's finished, or it's its last phases of being finished. It actually, the whole pink area used to be all industrial buildings. The Paperclip was then the only thing that was built before 1980, and then it was all completely filled with office buildings, with housing buildings, with schools, with parks, etc. It even got a new bridge, the Erasmus Bridge, which is the bottom bridge. So then this housing area, but this project took the form. It was not built for the typical, whereas the Paperclip was built for the typical inhabitant of that area. So it would be poor and working class, often from a migration background. This area was for a very large part to attract new inhabitants to this area and even to Rotterdam. So it was more aimed at middle classes, etc. And this is of course also typical for the way that from the 80s and 90s onward, urban renewal became much more something that worked in lockstep with the market, with the commercial market. This is also a sign of where the city worked together with market parties to make a commercially viable a new area of the city. Here you can see it. This is a very recent. Yeah, can't see much that is missing still. Oh, yeah, one or two. Yeah, that's true. That's true. On the Katendrecht, yeah. So I think this is a couple of years old. But this is here you can see how the Kop van Zuid was being filled with really rather monumental big buildings instead of the harbor areas. And what you can also see is that this is also Rotterdam building on its myth. Because Rotterdam always said of itself that we are more like an American city than a European city. And here they also explicitly call themselves Manhattan on the Maas. And then they built Manhattan on the Maas, and it looks like this. One last thing I wanted to show you is this. Well, one of the things that is the opposite of the dirty old town idea, or is that what we can see is that Rotterdam is actually undergoing a process that you can see in many European cities. And here you see 4 European cities, and you can see how they all have this beautiful downtown with historical buildings, and that's where you can get the good restaurants and the good museums, etc. At the same time, these buildings, these areas, also have a kind of a centrifugal effect where the immigrant population that's first lived in the areas close to the center are being driven outward and outward and outward. So the same 4 cities, if you look at the maps and the statistics, you can see that the working class and the immigrants are kind of moving outward and outward and outward because of housing prices, of course, but also because of the demolition and rebuild policies of the cities and the housing associations. So this is nearly a universal phenomenon. And it also has a lot to say about, but within that there's a huge differentiation in who gets welcomed into a city and not. So who is welcome are international students and expats. For them, the city builds buildings in the center of the city. They go. International students, for example, are being they're being solicited to move to Rotterdam, and then Rotterdam says we have great facilities for you. The same with expats, and then some are not. Of course, the refugees are not. Economic migrants are not. So this is an interesting thing for a city that is. This is one of the things what we talked about earlier, a Poland hotel. Now the city is thinking about making a special hotel for Polish workers so they don't live in hostels anymore and bother the rest. That's it.
This is a topic that we will be talking about extensively.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Because we did
Yeah.
this project, research and book exhibition called City of Comings and Goings. So we'll talk about it more.
Yeah, so this is my last image. This is also Rotterdam selling itself, and that a lot of its culture and a lot of its events and a lot of the way that it talks about itself is actually selling Rotterdam as a product to immigrants, expats, tourists, etc. I still have some slides about crime, but I'm not going to show them. Or do you think I should show them?
Show me one.
I'll show. Yeah, one of the things that happens if you want to present a perfect city to the world, is that there are always things that are not perfect. So what do you do with them? You have to hide them. You have to put them out of sight. So for example, Rotterdam's asylum seekers, they have an asylum on the very, 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 very edges of the city where really no one ever comes. And that is this one. You see a bunch of women walking inside. But a similar thing is this. Rotterdam used to have, well, like every city, I suppose, but this is a harbor city, so it has a strong tradition in it. Prostitution. The prostitution of Rotterdam used to happen right in the center of the city, quite close to here. And now, exactly on the spot where there is now a brand new housing development has been opened. So it would be housing. It would be prostitution for people in cars. So the cars would drive by. They would see the prostitute and drive her another time by, pick her up, and then go to some place to have sex, and then pay her hopefully, and then move on. But Rotterdam did not want that in the center of the city, also because it's near a housing area. You can see it also soliciting at a truck stop. So Rotterdam built this, and we've always used this as an example of Dutch planning. This is a state-planned, or by the municipality planned prostitution zone. So the prostitutes could stand under the purple roof. The cars could drive like this, and if they would have chosen one, they would drive like that and move in between those fences, have sex, etc. And this would make it more controllable, more, and also it would make it invisible, because it was way out in the harbor area. In the meantime, this has been demolished, and in the meantime, this harbor area is now, exactly this harbor area is now one of the most important parts of Rotterdam, Rotterdam's gentrification and rebuilding, and there's a whole hip town being built there. So one of the things that, the reason that we put things, we don't just talk about super diversity, we talk about the Anthropocene, and the interesting thing about crime and the control of it is that this is really about the things that people do not want you to see. You know, it's invisible networks and invisible things. But what happened in Rotterdam is that the city grew so much that even they took over the prostitution zone.
So where are the prostitutes now?
Yeah,
Well, a lot of them are.
in Jamaica.
I had a picture. Oh no, I took that slide away. The prostitutes now, there's something that has been happening to prostitution that has also happened to the gay scene. You used to have really zones or streets, for example in Amsterdam, where all the gay bars were, where gay people could go to and meet each other. But this has this has lessened in a strong way, and what is going on is that things like apps. Oh, my computer is empty. Apps, Tinder, all those similar apps, sometimes very specific for the gay world, have taken over that market. So you don't need a physical space anymore to go to and maybe meet someone. You do that all with apps. What I've heard from some older gay men living in Amsterdam, that is destroying the old gay scene as they knew it. And with prostitution you hear the same. You can, on a very low level, kind of solicit people to sell yourself to. And so things like a physical space for prostitution, it still exists, but not for this level of prostitution. This is of course a very low level. These women don't get a fraction of what the whores in Amsterdam in the Wallen, for example, get. This is really very pathetic, or I mean, not pathetic, sad, because they're often doing it for their heroin addiction.